This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
After 9 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Canada has experienced a shocking rise in anti-Semitism and an increase in hate crimes of 165%. His divisive politics, where he pits one group of Canadians against another, only makes matters worse. It also doesn't help that he takes years to list terrorist groups to the list of banned organizations, allowing them to fundraise and recruit here in Canada. This one should be easy, though. The Houthis are attacking civilian ships and innocent civilians. Our allies have already banned them. So will the government do the right thing and list this group as a terrorist organization today?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, we unequivocally condemn the acts we saw in Vancouver that were launched by Sami Doon. Acts like burning the flag, chanting death to Canada, acts like denying the events of October 7th and celebrating terrorism are unacceptable in this country. With respect to Sami Doon, we heard the Minister of Public Safety reference this yesterday. We've asked for an expedited review because decisions of this importance are always made on the advice of national security agencies.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
They continue to drag their feet, Mr. Speaker, but there's been another blow to the Prime Minister's carbon tax scheme. A new report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer shows yet again that Canadians are worse off under this tax. Here's what the total bill will be when the NDP Liberals finish quadrupling this tax. It'll cost people in Ontario $1,400, $1,500 in Newfoundland, and a whopping $2,000 in Saskatchewan. Canadians are already struggling with higher costs, higher groceries, and higher mortgage rates. The last thing they need is another bill from a useless carbon tax. If the government's so sure that Canadians support the tax, why not let the people decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, let me read you the first paragraph of the PBO's report. And I quote, "Considering only the fiscal impact of federal fuel charge, PBO estimates that average household in each of the backstop provinces in 2030-31 will see a net gain, receiving more from the Canada Carbon Rebate than the total amount they paid in federal fuel charge and related GST." Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition should apologize to Canadians for misleading them all these months.
Colleagues on all sides, please, I'm going to ask you to not take the floor unless the Speaker recognizes you. The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
The minister might want to read the rest of the report because in the quote he cited, he focused on a very key word: only the direct costs. When you factor in all the economic costs, it costs the Canadian household $1,400. Canadians are net losers under this carbon tax scheme, and this minister knows it. Right. So, if he's so sure that Canadians want this government to keep quadrupling the tax, why not let the people decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Let me read you another paragraph from the report, Mr. Speaker. Moreover, in 2030-31, for all backstop provinces, we estimate that the average household in each income quintile will see a net gain, except for average household in the highest income quintile, Mr. Speaker. You know what the Leader of the Opposition is doing? He wants to take money away from the middle class and poorer Canadians to protect his rich CEO friends. That's what he's doing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
The Minister is trying very hard to get Canadians not to understand the details. But the details are, and the facts are, that the Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed what Canadians already know. They're being robbed by a carbon tax, which is driving up the cost of groceries, of gas, and everyday essentials. In fact, a family in Prince Edward Island will pay almost $1,200 a year when the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax. Canadians don't support the carbon tax. We know 10 provinces don't support the carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister listen to Canadians and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
The member talks about the agricultural sector. Well, let's talk about the climate impacts on the agricultural sector, Mr. Speaker. Droughts in 2021 resulted in 27% decline in Canada's grain production. Over the last decade, over 200 Canadian farmers have experienced cost increases and revenue loss from climate impacts, Mr. Speaker. This member and this party never talks about the impacts of climate change on farmers, on the price of food in Canada. They want to try and make us believe that climate change isn't happening. It is happening, and on this side of the House, we're here for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
The minister is either living in denial or purposely misleading Canadians, because the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report is clear. It costs Canadians more to pay the carbon tax than what they get back in rebates. But if the minister doesn't believe me, I would encourage him to read the Parliamentary Budget report. But in the essence of time, let me help out. Page 19 states Canadians are worse off paying the carbon tax, period. That is the fact. But again, if the minister is so confident that Canadians support this carbon tax, why are they so afraid to call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
The member points to indirect costs, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about indirect costs. Loss of revenue of $150 million in 2023 due to flooded and farmlands across this country, Mr. Speaker. The dairy farmers, egg farmers of Canada, grain growers, Canal Council all support our plan to fight climate change. It's time for the Conservative Party of Canada to come on board, Mr. Speaker.
Hello. Order.
Yesterday at the public inquiry, the Chief of Staff to the then Public Safety Minister was unwilling to explain why a CSIS warrant sat on the Minister's desk for 54 days when, according to national security officials, such a warrant is typically signed off between 4 and 10 days. It has been reported that the subject of the warrant is a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister. Does the minister really expect Canadians to believe that this 54-day delay had nothing to do with the partisan interests of a Liberal party?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, it's ironic that the member opposite talks about political interest, because it was the Conservative leader, when he was the Minister of Democratic Institutions, said he wasn't going to take foreign interference seriously because it wasn't in his political interest to do so. On the other hand, on our side, this side of the House, we have taken the issues around foreign interference seriously since day one, including ensuring that we have protecting our democratic institutions, including the current study to look into Russian-based influencers operating in Canada that Conservatives want to block.
The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, there is no other plausible explanation for the delay. It was about Liberals protecting Liberals. The Attorney General is responsible for seeing that Cabinet upholds the independent and non-partisan principles of our justice system. His Cabinet colleague put the partisan interests of the Liberal Party ahead of the administration of justice. What does the Attorney General have to say about that?
Hear, 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 hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to foreign interference, this is not a new phenomenon, but what is new to Canadians is a government that actually takes it seriously. That is precisely why we have implemented a number of measures to ensure that our democratic institutions are strengthened, to ensure that it's not at the whim of the leader of the opposition when he thinks there's some sort of political advantage to him. Mr. Speaker, we will take the issues around foreign interference, no matter where they are coming from, incredibly seriously, and not cherry pick like the Conservatives do.
Canadians are fed up. New PBO reports, same results. Canadians pay more into the carbon tax scam than what they get back in phony rebates. An average Albertan family will pay nearly $2,000 in carbon taxes after this radical Liberal NDP government quadruples the carbon tax. That's why 10 provinces oppose the carbon tax scam. They know it's like the Prime Minister and not worth the cost. If they're so sure about this carbon tax scam, why not call a carbon tax election now so Canadians can decide to axe the tax for good?
That's right. Call it now. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone in this House and Canadians watching should take everything this finance critic says about the economy with a big grain of salt, Mr. Speaker. It is this finance critics that told us that if we paused our federal taxes, people in this province could save $1,000 without telling them that they'd have to drive from the North Pole to the South Pole, Mr. Speaker, to benefit from those wonderful savings. So I think we should all be very, very careful with what he says about the economy in this House, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
We won't take any lessons from that minister who let Jasper burn because of his incompetence. I'll send him over a copy of that PBO's report with some diagrams and some pictures so maybe he can understand, and flip over to page 19, table 3, that clearly shows a majority of Canadians pay more into this scam than what they get back in these phony rebates.
That's right.
2 million Canadians are going into a food bank in a single month. 1 in 4 Canadians are skipping meals because of their carbon tax scam. If they're so sure about this carbon tax scam, let's go to a carbon tax election now so Canadians can kick this costly carbon tax coalition to the curb for good.
That's it, call it! The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we all suffer when we see that there are folks in our community that are struggling. And there is more work to be done, which is exactly why on this side of the House we continue to fight for Canadians, to fight for high-quality child care, to fight for the Canada Child Benefit, to fight for the environment and the carbon rebate, Mr. Speaker. But let's not kid ourselves. We know that these programs that Canadians rely on would be in danger if the Conservatives had their way.
Mr. Speaker, in the $400 million corruption scandal, which is the Green Slush Fund, you, Mr. Speaker, ruled that the Canadian people have the absolute right to demand the unredacted production of documents be given to the police. But this government refuses Parliament's absolute authority. Shame. Parliament is the people, and the absolute authority of Parliament is like your mom checking your room after you said you cleaned it. You know what, you might be able to hide 1 or 2 things, and the government may be able to think they get off the hook, but Parliament is there to inspect and clean the House. Mr. Speaker, this is a messy House. When will this government clean it?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Great job, Ryan. Speaker, as I've said, the government has handed over thousands of pages of documents. However, the big issue here that I think Canadians are concerned about is that they know politicians shouldn't be directing police.
Exactly.
And what is at issue here is the fact that this House has decided that they are judge and jury and that the police should investigate something. We have no problem with police investigations. In fact, of course, any government would respond to them. And I would expect that any government of any stripe would react the same way we are today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, the police have already opened an investigation. This is just Parliament asking for documents to be turned over. It's the ask and the absolute rule of Parliament, and this government's refusing. Just think of it like a business, right? This government forgets that in a business, they're the employee. The Canadian public are the owners. In the real world, if a business refused to, or employees refuse to hand over documents or hand over anything in an investigation, those employees will be fired. Mr. Speaker, is this government just waiting to be fired by the Canadian public, or will they hand over the documents?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, in the real world, police have to request warrants. They have to go through due process to get information. It's not up to parliamentarians and politicians to direct police because they have a political vendetta. Mr. Speaker, Canadians expect due process, and they expect that politicians are here to protect their rights, not to get rid of their rights. Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from South South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is so much Liberal corruption that Liberals are covering up their cover-up of the $400 million of corruption at the Liberal Green Slush Fund. The Speaker ruled that the NDP Liberals violated the House order to turn the Green Slush Fund documents over to the RCMP criminal investigation. Obstruction of justice is the Liberals' middle name. They refused to turn over documents in the SNC scandal, in the We Charity scandal, in the Winnipeg Lab scandal, and the foreign interference scandal. Just end the corruption cover-up and turn the documents over to the RCMP. How bad is it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, every Canadian watching right now wants parliamentarians to do their job. The job of the opposition is to hold the government to account. The job of the opposition is not to direct the police. You don't need to take my word for it, Mr. Speaker. How about we hear from the Commissioner of the RCMP himself, who said that, quote, there is a significant risk that the motion could be interpreted as a circumvention of normal investigative processes and charter protections. He went on, in a free and democratic society, this ensures that the government cannot direct or influence the actions of law enforcement. We agree with the RCMP. It's time these guys start listening to the cops.
The Honourable Member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
The Liberals blacked out so much in the documents that the Prime Minister's office ran out of toner for their copiers. So apparently it's okay to turn blacked out documents that hide Liberal corruption over to the RCMP. That's not a constitutional issue, but it is a constitutional issue to remove the redactions and expose the Liberal corruption. News for this minister, the Constitution does not exist to protect Liberals from criminal investigation. So will they just stop their cover-up addiction, and hand the unedited documents over to the RCMP?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
I have some grave concerns with what the member opposite said, beginning with the fact that I assume he's actually not seen those documents, so I'm not sure what he's talking about there, because the documents have been handed over. But what's of greater concern, and it was the RCMP who said it themselves, is that the way that the Conservatives are acting would actually compromise any police investigation, because the evidence would not be considered. So what is of concern is that they're interfering in an investigation, they're interfering in police independence, and Canadians should be rightly concerned that Conservative politicians want to direct the police. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Sometimes it seems like the Liberals